Hello everyone, welcome to this live Ustream of what's new in Hyperledger Composer, and also a special welcome to you all, including our early program or early adopter community. So today's session is about introducing you to what's new and what recently has been added to Hyperledger Composer. And obviously, as we'll go forward, we'll have a look at the agenda very briefly. Before I go ahead with the agenda, I'd like to introduce you to two people who will be helping out with the demos today. Their names are Caroline Church, so let's put a person to the voice when she does her demo later. Caroline is a lead developer for Composer Playground. Say hi to Caroline.
Hi.
Okay, and also we have Dan Selman. Dan Selman is a chief architect for Hyperledger Composer, and he'll be doing the demo on the vehicle lifecycle demo. There's
Hello
Dan.
everyone, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, guys and girls. Okay, so let's have a brief look at the agenda for today. So as you can see, we're going to introduce you about some of the things that have recently been updated to Hyperledger Composer. So one of the main things has been the Hyperledger Fabric v1 support. And obviously I'm aware that some of you on the live stream today are aware of that already, but suffice to say for everyone, we've added v1 support in Composer, so obviously Playground and the Composer CLI. And now you can define both the version 0.6 and v1.0 connection profiles in Playground. And obviously we'll see some of that in the demo today in Composer Playground. And so just to confirm, we now have the supported Hyperledger Fabric environments of v1.0 Alpha 1 and v0.6. And obviously we're working on support for the recently available v1.0 Alpha 2. Okay, so we'll also have a demo today for the vehicle lifecycle demo, which Dan will go through. It's an end-to-end walkthrough of the demo, which was built using Composer. After that, Caroline will give a demo on identity management in Composer Playground. And she'll show you the ability to be able to switch between multiple identities in the Fabric environment, and obviously managing identities in wallets as well. And lastly, Caroline, as part of the demo, will show you the ability to do identity switching instantaneously available in the web runtime. And obviously the benefit of that is allowing you also to do access control list testing as well. So the next item we will do is present what's upcoming in Composer over the next few months. So we'll have a discussion on that as well. Just for your benefit, this session will also be recorded and available for later viewing. And also we will endeavor to answer questions that are posted on the chat. And ideally, we will also have you join the Rocket Chat community, because any question and answer sessions that we have will be for the benefit of everyone in the community. One other thing, which is to add that we have some links in these slides which will be available to you. If you haven't already become a member of the Composer community, then we would encourage you to do so. We'll provide the links for you later. And obviously we have other links to things like the documentation and obviously how to get the code or to get started. Okay, so we'll move on to the next item, which is the vehicle lifecycle demo, and Dan Selman will take you through that.
Hello everyone, my name's Dan Selman. What we're going to do is we're going to walk you through a demo that we've been building over the last couple of weeks. It's all built using Composer. And what we tried to do is sort of go beyond the hello world to build a real sample that illustrates blockchain, shows you some of the value proposition of blockchain, but also shows you how to apply it using Composer. And hopefully you'll see a lot of the value of Composer come out through this demo. So the scenario we've taken is around the life cycle of a vehicle, because this is something that most of us experience, that we can mostly relate to. Most people have cars, and most people have had to register the cars with the government regulator, or may have bought or sold cars. So this vehicle life cycle is quite an interesting one to use to explain blockchain. So before we move into the live part of the demo, let's just look at that business network. So blockchain in general and Composer in particular is all around defining the business network. And for a vehicle, we see some of the different roles. So I'm going to do my weatherman thing here that the team makes fun of me about. So I'm going to point to the screen. And here we can see the different participants or sort of personas in that business network. You've got Paul, who's a consumer. He would like to buy a car, maybe sell a car. He's the owner of the vehicle. You've got Mike, who works for Arium, who are the vehicle manufacturer. They've obviously got the factory and they're going to fulfill Paul's order and ship him a car. You've got Debbie, who works for the vehicle regulator. So in the United States, that's the DMV. In the United Kingdom, that's the DVLA. And all around the world, there are national equivalents. There's always a government regulator that you register your vehicle to. Then there's the police. They're obviously interested in vehicles on the road and the owners of vehicles, but for a completely different reason. You've got Alex, who works for the Vehicle Standards Agency. So they often attest to the roadworthiness of vehicles. So in the UK, you have to pass an MOT test regularly, and that proves that your vehicle is fit to be on the road. And that's often a separate sort of regulatory function. And then down at the bottom, we've got Tommen, who works for an insurance company, because all vehicles that are on the road have to be taxed and insured in most countries. So you can see that around this key asset, the vehicle, which we'll be tracking on the blockchain, we've got all of these different participants that are interested in the vehicle data, and for quite different reasons, right? But there's a real benefit to having that single source of truth about the data on a vehicle. So for the demo purposes, we're going to really focus in on three of those participants. So Paul, who's the buyer of the vehicle, Mike, who works for Arium, the vehicle manufacturer, and Debbie, who works for the vehicle regulator. So in this scenario, we have a sort of fully digital buying experience for this vehicle. This is kind of an on-demand vehicle supply chain, vehicle manufacturing process, where Paul can simply go to his iOS application, order a vehicle, customize it, and that order is going to go straight into the blockchain where it can be picked up by Arium for manufacture. So let's start with that process and have a look at that. The iOS application, which was built using the Ionic framework, so I can run it in a browser, or I can run it on an iPad or on an iPhone. It's this nice responsive application. And I'm going to press the Build Your Car button, and I can see the various models of car that Arium manufacture. So there's the Arium Nova, the Arium Thanos, and the Arium Nebula. So Paul, he'd like to purchase the Nebula, so he presses the Build button, and then he can then start to customize the car that he'd like to order. So he's going to have the option for the executive trim. He's going to order the car in, well, he's a bit of an extrovert, so he's going to get it in sunburst orange. And with the papyrus interior. And he's going to get the extended warranty. And then he then presses the purchase and build button. And what's going to happen when I press this button is that a Composer transaction that describes that purchase order is going to be sent from the mobile application via the Composer REST API and is going to be placed onto the blockchain. So Paul gets a confirmation that his order has been received. And at which point we're going to switch roles and put ourselves in the shoes of Mike, who works for Arium and is responsible for tracking these orders and making sure that they get fulfilled. So Mike has his own web dashboard where he can see the incoming orders. And sure enough, he can see a new order for an Arium nebula in sunburst orange has just come in. And he sees that order because there is this shared blockchain between the iOS application that Paul is using and this web dashboard that we've built for Arium. And what we've done for demo purposes is when I press the Start Manufacture button, we're going to simulate that vehicle manufacturing supply chain. So what you'll see is that the vehicle gets manufactured and goes through a particular manufacturing life cycle. And what we're trying to simulate there is that Arium probably has an existing ERP system that they use for managing the orders within the factory. And in fact, we could even imagine that some of the equipment in the factory is instrumented using IoT. And those IoT events are going to be translated into transactions that are sent into Composer and that update the blockchain. So when I press the Start Manufacture button, we will start to see the vehicle go through this life cycle where the chassis is first manufactured. Then we can start to work on the interior and the paint. Then the vehicle identification number is assigned. That's the unique ID of the vehicle that's actually engraved into the chassis. And then finally, the owner is assigned to the vehicle. That's when Paul is associated with the vehicle as the legal owner from the government's point of view. And you can see in a few seconds we simulated that process, which in reality would have taken several days probably. So if we now flip back to Paul's experience, because there's a shared blockchain between Arium and Paul, we can see that Paul was instantly notified when the vehicle moved through those lifecycle states. So that's interesting, right? But we could build an application like that without blockchain. If the only participants are Paul and the manufacturer, then it would be pretty easy to stand up a website, and build a mobile application to create that one-on-one relationship between Arium, the manufacturer, and Paul, the consumer. Where things get much more interesting from a blockchain point of view is where we bring in the regulator into this picture. So, as I said, a key moment in the life cycle of the vehicle is when the vehicle identification number is engraved into the chassis of the vehicle. Because as soon as that happens, then the vehicle can be registered with the regulator. The vehicle starts to exist as an asset from a regulatory point of view. So we're now going to switch roles and talk about Debbie, who works for the equivalent of the DMV or the DVLA, the government regulator of vehicles. And of course, she has her own dashboard, right? She's sitting in her office, looking at the vehicles that are being manufactured and registered so they can be driven on the road. And what she sees is a sort of a transactional view of the vehicles that are being registered, and she can actually see these transactions coming in real time. And let me refresh the screen. And you can see that some of these transactions are, for example, an owner being assigned to a vehicle. So she gets real-time visibility into all the vehicles that are being manufactured and are registered, via this vehicle identification number. So that's fairly interesting. But what Debbie's really interested in are the vehicles that are out of compliance, the vehicles that don't meet the government regulation. She can see all these vehicles that are, just compliant. But what she can also do is she can run this suspicious vehicles report and get a view of the vehicles that have been tagged as out of compliance with government regulation. And when she views that report, she can see there are 4 or 5 vehicles here that are out of compliance. So for example, this vehicle has been flagged as a vehicle whose mileage isn't steadily increasing over the course of the life cycle. At some points in its life cycle, the mileage is actually going down. So that would be a very interesting situation for a vehicle. Could indicate that there's fraud, or there's a problem with the odometer in the vehicle. It's definitely something that should be looked into. This vehicle is also interesting to Debbie. So it was declared as an insurance write-off with the insurance company, but it's still marked as active in Debbie's database. So either some paperwork or process has gone astray, or this could indicate some fraud has happened. So somebody's written off a vehicle and then welded the thing back together again, and it's actually still riding around on the road, and could be a safety issue. And where did the data that drives these reports come from? Well, it probably came from some offline batch analytics. So Debbie is processing the data that's on the blockchain using batch analytics software, and she's using that software to tag some of the vehicles on the blockchain as kind of requiring further investigation. So I introduced Paul, and his experience is really driven by this iOS mobile application, right? And through the Composer REST server, we make building those sorts of applications very easy, right? It's comparatively straightforward to create an Angular application that uses some of these mobile frameworks and make RESTful calls through the Composer REST server so that you can submit transactions or query for data that's on the blockchain. Mike's dashboard and experience was really driven by some existing infrastructure that Arium has. So the ERP system and perhaps the Internet of Things sensors that they have in their factories. So the engineers that work for Arium, they need to take the events that are coming out of their ERP system and perhaps the IoT sensors, and they need to publish those onto the blockchain, when key sort of lifecycle events occur. So from a regulatory point of view, as I said, the key moment in the life cycle of the vehicle is its birth, right? And from a regulatory point of view, the vehicle is born when its vehicle identification number is stamped into the chassis. We then had Debbie. She also has a nice dashboard to browse the data on the blockchain, but she also needs this quite powerful offline batch analytics capability. So you need to be able to get the data off the blockchain, run batch analytics, and have the output of the analytics probably submit transactions to tag certain vehicles as requiring follow-up. So there's an interesting tie-in there. And then finally, we can bring in some of the other actors and think about what they might require. So Alex, for the Vehicle Standards Agency, may have a legacy infrastructure that's heavily batch orientated. Maybe they're getting flat files from the garages that they use that are testing the vehicles, and every 24 hours or something they need to play those batch files and have the output of the batch files update the blockchain. Tommen, for the insurer, he has to underwrite the insurance for the vehicles. So he's probably using business process and business rules to calculate who he wants to insure and the rates of insurance. And those business rules would probably be interested in the history of the vehicle on the blockchain. So he could have that trusted source of truth about the history of the vehicle on the blockchain. And that source of truth can influence the quotes that he's offering for insurance. And then finally, the police may have a strong enterprise integration mindset. They've got existing assets and databases and infrastructure that they want to integrate with data on the blockchain. And then perhaps running graph analytics, perhaps finding vehicles on the blockchain that are associated with known criminal gangs, or perhaps tying it into Internet of Things sensors that they have to detect stolen vehicles. So you can see how all of these different participants need to share this common data, but they're all doing it for slightly different purposes. So I'm going to stop there, and now Caroline is going to kind of lift the hood up and show you a little bit how we actually built this application from a Composer point of view.
There we go. So now you've seen the vehicle lifecycle demo. Now we're going to show you behind the scenes a little bit. So for those of you who are new to Hyperledger Composer, this is what you see when you first come into the playground. And you can use it for creating and testing your business networks. So you can see here on the left, you have some files that describe your business network, and on the right is the contents of the files. And then at the top, we have some tabs. Now, one of these tabs is the Connection Profiles tab. So if we just switch to it, you'll see we have a list of our connection profiles here. And you'll see at the moment, we're connected to the web browser profile. So this isn't connected to a real blockchain. It's just using a simulation of a blockchain that we can use to test things out, but without connecting to a real blockchain. So now, if we want to actually connect to a real blockchain, we have to create a new connection profile. So if we just click here, and you can see here that you can either connect to a 0.6 Hyperledger or a version 1 Hyperledger, or, as we will do today, you can import a pre-existing connection profile. So we click here, and we get a choice of files, which is this one. You see it's imported it, and now we just need to give it a name. And you can see here it's populated all these properties with various connection details to connect to my V1 fabric. And then I can save this. And now when I want to use this profile, I just click Use this profile. And you'll see it comes up with this pop-ups asking me to give an identity. Now I already have an identity in my wallet of admin, but if I wanted to connect with a different identity, I could just click here and then fill in the details here. But we'll use admin at the moment. So we'll click connect. And this is now connected successfully to our V1 profile. And now if I switch back to the Define tab, you'll see I've got a lot more files here. So this is the vehicle lifecycle business network. And you can see here I have the model files which have been used, the script files which describe all the transactions I have in my business network, and then some access control permissions. So now if I show you one of the model files, and you'll see if I scroll down a little bit, you can see this is how we've described one of our participants. This is the manufacturer participant, and this has a property of a company ID. And then for an asset, we have an order asset, and you'll see that also has some properties, and it also describes relationships with manufacturers and orderers. And you'll see here also that we've defined a transaction, and you see that it has various properties and relationships again. And now if we take a look at one of the script files, you can see how we've defined a transaction. So this is our place order transaction. And you see that this is just JavaScript, so it's quite easy to write your transactions. And you can see here that we create our order, and we say what, we give it the details of the order, and then we save that order and send it off to the manufacturer. And finally here, this permissions file describes all the rules for who can create assets and participants and who can submit transactions. So now we've created our business network. You'll see here that we have a deploy button. Now this business network's already deployed, so we don't need to deploy it again, but you'd click that button if you wanted to deploy. So if I switch to the test tab, this now allows you to test out your business network, and you'll see here on the left you have a list of your registries. So here we have our participant registries, our asset registries, and also you can see which transactions have been submitted. So if I click on the owner participant, you see here we have a list of private owners, and you can see their name and various other properties about them. If I show you the asset, we've got some vehicles, and here you can see the details of the vehicles and who owns it. Now, if I just copy that ID and we go to submit transaction, before I do that, you'll notice that the vehicle status is currently active. So now this owner has decided that they don't want this vehicle anymore. So we've decided that we're going to scrap it. So if we submit transaction, and then you can choose from a list of transactions. So we want to scrap the vehicle. We don't need any of the log entries because they're optional. So we'll just delete those. And then we can paste in the number. And if we cancel that again, and we'll try to do that again. There we go. We paste it in there. There we go, that's better. And we can submit this transaction. And you can see these are the transactions that we've submitted so far. But if we go back to our vehicle, and you can see now that the vehicle has been scrapped. So now if we take a look at identities, so you'll see here we can now switch to the Identities tab. And we currently have an Identities admin, and you can see that's the one that I'm connected to. But if you want to change identities, I can issue a new identity, and I can put in an ID for that. So I can put in Caroline. And if I start typing Caroline, you'll see that I get a drop down and I can auto-complete that. So I can just click on there and it will fill in the correct registry for me, and that's the ID, and I can click Create New. And you'll see here that the ID is being created, and I have two options now. I can either send the ID and use a secret to somebody for them to use, or I can add it to my wallet so I can use it myself. So here you'll see it's added it to my wallet, and now I can click on it, which will then switch identities, and you can see that I am now Caroline. So now I'll hand over to Dan to talk about the futures.
Thank you, Caroline. So I'm hoping that you thought that was pretty awesome. I did. That was the real vehicle lifecycle business network that previously we'd been interacting through, using those nice UIs that we've built. And here Caroline was able to interact with it sort of live using the playground. So she put herself in that sort of developer role where she could interactively browse the assets, look at the business logic for the network, look at the models for the network, and even submit transactions and see the effects of the transaction processing. And then the last thing that she showed, which is pretty awesome, is the ability to, on the fly inside Playground, switch identities. So that's really useful if you've written access control rules that depend on the identity of the person that's submitting the transactions. Because now inside Playground, you can really easily switch between multiple identities and check that your access control logic is working. And that works both in the web profile and in the Fabric profile. And as I hope you saw, you can have connection profiles for as many instances as you like. So you could have Playground connected to your local server on your laptop, a development server that you're sharing with other people, a staging server. Probably wouldn't recommend that it's connected to a production server. It's not really intended for that. But it makes it super easy to switch between multiple servers and to interact with them. So that's what we have today. Now we want to just spend a few minutes describing some of the stuff that we're working on, which is also extremely exciting. So the first thing is the vehicle lifecycle demo itself. What you just saw Caroline do in the Playground, you can do it today because all of those assets are already on GitHub. They're already open source. So everything that Caroline just showed, you can do it right now. What we haven't published yet is the source code for the nice UIs, the iOS application, the regulatory dashboard, and the manufacturer's dashboard. And we plan to push that out in the next week or so. So that will appear. And what we're hoping is that the community is going to start hacking on that to improve it, and maybe to reskin it for different industries. It's a great way of showing the value of blockchain. The next sort of feature that we're pushing out, and this should arrive in the release that we're going to cut a week from today, is the ability to emit outbound events. And this is something that people have been asking for a while, because often something interesting has happened on the blockchain and you want to notify an external system. So the underlying fabric has this capability. They have this event hub. And now what we've done is we've exposed that via a JavaScript API. So your transaction processor functions can emit events. But because we're sort of model-driven people, obviously we want to model the events. So what you can do now in the Composer modeling language is you can define the structure of an event. So event, my event, identified by an event ID. And you can put all the data that you want to capture in that event in the model. So it could be primitive types, relationships, everything that you can do essentially in a transaction, you can do in an event. And then in your transaction processor function, you can create a new instance of the event, set its fields, and then simply emit it. And Composer will take care of mapping that down into the underlying Fabric APIs, so it gets propagated onto the event hub as a piece of JSON data. And then to consume the event, you can use some Composer API to register a JavaScript function, a callback, a listener, which will be called whenever an event is published onto the event hub. So right now you have to use that JavaScript API. Probably in the future we'll look at extending that with webhooks, so people that are using the Composer REST server can also consume those events more easily. Right, so we're pretty excited by that, because it's a natural tie-in to some of the work on analytics that I showed and talked about earlier. It's a nice way of getting data off platform, perhaps for driving a business process that's running on a peer, or siphoning that data off into a log analysis service where you can slice and dice it and kind of do KPIs, etc., around the performance of your business network. And then we get two pretty meaty big beasts, two big chunks that are in flight at the moment. The first one is queries. So if you've looked at Hyperledger Fabric v1, you've probably seen that you can optionally configure it to use Couchdb to store the world state. So Couchdb is a NoSQL JSON-centric database. And Composer stores and serializes all of its artifacts as JSON data structures. So there's a natural synergy there. So at the moment we have v1 running in the lab configured to use Couchdb. So all the world state is being stored in Couchdb. And now the second step is to start writing Couchdb queries so we can run complex, rich queries over the data that's in the world state. And then, sort of similarly to the approach for emitting events, what we'll do is we'll add a query function that you can call from your transaction processes. So you can essentially say, run this complex query against the world state and give me back the results. And Composer will take care of percolating that down into Fabric and bringing all the results back up again, making them available to the transaction processor function. So it's a pretty exciting capability, and it's really a must-have for a lot of regulatory reporting scenarios, where you might want to say, find me all the white Ford Mustangs manufactured between the year 2001 and 2005. That requires that complex query string. It's not something you can do with a key-based query, which we support today. So we've broken this work down into two phases. Phase one you're going to have to write the native Couchdb queries using the Couchdb query language. And we may map those to logical names, so that your code isn't polluted with big long Couchdb query strings. In phase 2, we would like to have a Composer query language that's expressed in terms of the Composer model. And then we will do the work to compile the Composer query language down into Couchdb queries. Phase 1, I think, will probably take us, at least a month. And then we want to get feedback from everyone, get a better understanding about the types of queries that you're running, and then we'll use that feedback to design the query language for phase 2. The second big thing we're working on is the historian. So if you've looked at Composer, you probably have seen that we have this notion of a transaction registry. So when transactions are submitted into the business network, the runtime automatically persists them into the transaction registry, which lives in the world state. But today it's not terribly useful, because essentially all you can do from the JavaScript API is get all the transactions in the registry or get a transaction by key. So we want to sort of build the next generation of that, which we've called historian, where of course we're still going to keep storing the transactions, but we also want to store a lot of metadata about what happened when we processed a transaction. So the runtime actually knows which assets were created, updated, and deleted during the processing of a transaction. And we want to attach that metadata and associate it with the transaction as a sort of a log entry in the historian. And then that starts to get extremely powerful once you combine it with queries, because it allows you to write complex queries over the historical data that you have in the historian. So, I don't know, find all the participants in this network that have interacted with asset 1, 2, 3, or show me the history of all transactions, or show me all transactions that have deleted an asset, or show me all transactions that have interacted with asset ABC. And you can see again, if you put yourselves in Debbie's mindset, to build a lot of those regulatory reports or sort of provenance or compliance reports, we really need that level of historian data. So that's pretty exciting. Again, I think we'll build it out incrementally and get feedback from the community. The first step is make the transaction registry more accessible and start to attach that metadata about what happened during the processing of a transaction, and then we'll bind it to the queries once both of those features come online. So there's a lot of other things in flight. They're all tracked in public GitHub. So if you want to get kind of more into the details of what we're working on and how things are prioritized, please take a look at GitHub. The bigger items are tagged using this epic tag. So if you click on an item that has the epic tag, click on epic, you will see, I think it's about 10, fairly meaty items that we describe as epics, that kind of are, big, meaningful end-user features. But this is supposed to be a dialogue, right? We want your feedback. We need your help to prioritize these things. So Paul is going to touch on it in a minute, but please come to the community calls. Please guide us. This is a team sport. We need your help on some of these things. So I'm now going to hand back to Paul, who's going to tell you about some of the other resources that we have available.
Okay, so just a reminder. Well, firstly, the main reminder is obviously this session is being recorded. So anything that you want to backtrack on and have a look at it again, we'll make this available on YouTube. So that's number one. Number two is just a reminder of some of the links. Obviously, the main one is the documentation link with this URL. And from there, you'll find a tab at the top, a menu tab to take you to the links to join our community. So obviously, Rocket Chat is our main channel for chat. We've obviously got Stack Overflow for support, and obviously the tags for those and the URLs for those are listed in here, so I don't need to describe them in detail. But suffice to say, if you haven't already joined the community, we'd be most welcoming to you, and obviously we would really appreciate your input as well. So that's another reason, because obviously we can help improve Composer. And if I skip on, obviously we'd hope to have more sessions like this as well in the next few months. So obviously give you an update on what's happening with Hyperledger Composer, and obviously brief you or give you an update on the things that have just been developed and we can demo to you. And obviously, as Dan has already articulated, some of the things that are upcoming in the months ahead. To get a digest, to get a mail digest from the Composer community, I've provided the links for you to subscribe. And obviously one of those things will be an update about the next upcoming community call, and they're weekly calls. And actually they cater for 2 different time zones. One is around 2 p.m. UK to cope with those who are coming in from the US time zones. And then also there's another call the following week, which is alternated, which is to allow people from the Asian time zones to join the call as well. So we flip or alternate the times on a weekly basis, but suffice to say the community calls are on a weekly basis. So with that, I will wrap up. If you've got any questions, you've got the links to the documentation. Obviously, you've got Twitter handles as well. I'd also like to thank Dan and Caroline for their demonstrations today, and obviously we look forward to your questions as well. And the last thing is, I've sent the slide deck to all of those who have registered for the event, and if you've got any further questions, you can respond to me on email as well. So thank you very much, and I wish you all a pleasant day.